room was built to intimidate men into agreement. 40 floors above the city, inside a tower of black glass and controlled silence, executives worth billions sat beneath cold architectural lighting, waiting for a signature that would redirect the future of an entire industry. Every advisor in the room believed the outcome was inevitable. The market had already priced in the merger. Journalists were preparing headlines before the deal was even finalized. Analysts called it the safest strategic alignment of the decade. Yet at the center of the table sat a man whose stillness disturbed everyone present, because he had already decided he would refuse. Not emotionally, not dramatically, not impulsively. He simply understood something the others did not. Every system eventually becomes vulnerable to the people courageous enough to reject its assumptions. The chairman across from him spoke with rehearsed confidence. Growth projections, market certainty, global expansion, artificial urgency disguised as opportunity. The language of modern power always sounds rational, moments before it becomes desperate. Around the table, executives nodded mechanically, terrified of appearing uncertain inside an environment engineered to punish hesitation. Nobody wanted to become the dissenter. Nobody wanted to challenge the momentum of consensus, because consensus feels safe to weak minds. Consensus removes responsibility. Consensus allows mediocrity to hide inside collective movement. Yet the silent man continued observing the room with almost surgical detachment, because he understood a dangerous truth about human behavior. The majority is usually emotionally invested in maintaining comfort, not truth, and comfort has bankrupted more intelligent people than failure ever could. There is a strange psychological weakness hidden inside conventional success. The more society rewards a person for obedience, the more psychologically dependent they become on external validation. They stop listening to instinct. They stop questioning momentum. They stop examining the architecture of power around them, because they become addicted to belonging within it. Entire corporations collapse this way. Entire economies collapse this way. Entire civilizations quietly decay, while intelligent people continue applauding the illusion of stability. Because rejecting the crowd requires a form of loneliness, most people cannot survive. Selective defiance begins precisely there, not with rebellion for attention, not with emotional opposition, not with ego-driven contrarianism, but with disciplined refusal to surrender perception to collective hypnosis. The elite individuals who reshape markets rarely think like revolutionaries in the beginning. In fact, many appear strangely calm, almost detached from the emotional energy surrounding mainstream trends. While others race toward whatever feels socially validated, they slow down, observe longer, refuse faster. Their silence unsettles people, because silence forces the environment to reveal itself without interruption. And what the environment usually reveals is insecurity disguised as certainty. Modern business culture worships constant motion, because motion creates the illusion of intelligence. Meetings, notifications, expansion, visibility, public announcements, everyone performing productivity, while quietly starving for clarity. But the most dangerous minds in high-level strategy often move differently. They understand that every unnecessary action creates exposure, and exposure creates vulnerability. This is why selective defiance often appears irrational to average observers. The disciplined leader declines profitable distractions, rejects premature partnerships, walks away from applause, refuses visibility during periods when the market desperately demands noise. And this creates confusion, because average minds interpret refusal as weakness. But disciplined refusal is one of the rarest forms of power on earth. The ability to say no calmly while everyone else is emotionally seduced by opportunity separates builders from performers. Look carefully at the psychology of scarcity. Human beings instinctively assign greater value to whatever appears difficult to access difficult to influence, difficult to predict. This principle governs luxury markets, elite institutions, geopolitical leverage, even human relationships. Yet most ambitious people sabotage their own authority by becoming psychologically overavailable. They explain too much, reveal too much, react too quickly. They chase relevance until their presence loses weight entirely. But the leaders who command unusual respect often operate through controlled absence. They become difficult to emotionally pressure because their internal world is not governed by external urgency. This is where Stoicism transforms from philosophy into strategic architecture. The Stoic does not reject emotion because he lacks humanity. He rejects emotional slavery because he understands how quickly emotion distorts perception under pressure. The market panics. He observes. Rivals provoke. He delays response. Journalists speculate. He remains silent. Not because silence feels comfortable, but because he understands that every environment eventually exposes itself to the individual disciplined enough to wait longer than everyone else. Patience becomes psychological leverage, and leverage reorders power. There is a hidden reason elite decision-makers appear emotionally colder than the environment surrounding them. They are protecting cognitive clarity from emotional contamination. Most people do not realize how deeply collective emotion shapes decision-making. Fear spreads socially. Excitement spreads socially. Desperation spreads socially. Entire industries become infected with irrational momentum because individuals stop thinking independently and begin synchronizing emotionally with the crowd around them. This is why financial bubbles become possible. This is why corporations overexpand before collapsing. This is why weak leaders surround themselves with agreement instead of truth. Selective defiance interrupts this infection. It creates psychological distance between external pressure and internal judgment. Inside that distance, uncommon vision becomes possible. The most sophisticated leaders in history understood that strategic refusal often creates more authority than aggressive expansion ever could. When everyone rushes toward the same opportunity, scarcity disappears. And once scarcity disappears, value begins collapsing silently. But the individual willing to step outside the collective race suddenly becomes psychologically elevated because independence itself has become rare. Rarity attracts attention. Attention attracts influence. Influence attracts capital. But almost nobody can tolerate the emotional discomfort required to reach that stage, because selective defiance demands temporary misunderstanding. It demands periods where intelligent people doubt you publicly. It demands silence while competitors celebrate premature victories. It demands the ability to watch the crowd receive validation while you remain strategically invisible. And invisibility terrifies ambitious people because modern culture has conditioned them to believe visibility equals significance. It does not. Visibility often signals dependency. Real power frequently develops underground, quietly, without applause, without consensus, without permission. There is an ancient psychological paradox hidden inside all high-level authority. The less desperately a person seeks approval, the more psychologically magnetic they become. This is not manipulation. It is behavioral mathematics. Human beings instinctively trust individuals who appear internally governed, because internal governance signals stability. Stability signals competence. Competence attracts resources. The selective dissenter unconsciously projects this stability because his decisions are not emotionally outsourced to public opinion. He can withstand isolation longer than others. That alone makes him dangerous. Watch how markets react to uncertainty. The average participant seeks reassurance immediately. They search for headlines, experts, consensus, emotional confirmation. They want someone else to absorb responsibility for difficult decisions. But elite operators understand that clarity rarely exists during critical moments. Clarity appears afterward, when the opportunity has already disappeared. So they cultivate the ability to function inside ambiguity without emotional collapse. This ability changes everything, because once a person becomes psychologically independent from collective emotional swings, he stops reacting impulsively to noise. And the moment impulsive reaction disappears, strategic patience emerges. Strategic patience is deeply misunderstood by modern ambition culture. Weak people interpret patience as passivity because they cannot detect invisible positioning. But high-level patience is rarely passive. It is accumulation without announcement, observation without exposure, preparation without performance. The selective dissenter may appear motionless externally, while internally reorganizing entire structures of influence. This is why elite competitors often fear quiet individuals more than loud ones. Noise reveals itself too quickly. Silence conceals timing, and timing determines outcomes. The modern world constantly pressures intelligent people into premature exposure. Announce your plans, share your goals, signal your movements publicly, become visible before the foundation is stable. But disciplined minds resist this pressure because they understand something primitive about human perception. Exposure invites interference. The moment a vision becomes visible too early, it begins absorbing external energy from people who neither understand nor deserve access to it. Some will envy it. Some will discourage it. Some will unconsciously sabotage it simply because your discipline reminds them of their own weakness. This is why selective defiance includes strategic concealment, not dishonesty, protection. A fortress without walls eventually becomes a public hallway, and most people have turned their minds into public hallways. Every opinion enters. Every trend influences them. Every criticism destabilizes them. Every opportunity distracts them. Then they wonder why clarity disappears. But clarity requires perimeter. The selective dissenter builds that perimeter deliberately. He controls access to his focus, controls access to his emotions, controls access to his long-term vision, because he understands that every empire is destroyed internally before it collapses externally. There is another paradox hidden beneath this entire philosophy. The more independent a person becomes psychologically, the less he needs to dominate others socially. Weak people seek control loudly because they lack internal authority. Strong people rarely need theatrical displays of dominance because their stability already alters room dynamics automatically. This is why true authority often feels quiet, calm, economical with words. The selective dissenter does not chase attention because attention naturally gravitates toward grounded certainty in chaotic environments, especially during crisis. Crisis exposes everyone eventually. The reactive expose their fear, the arrogant expose their fragility, the impulsive expose their lack of preparation. But the disciplined dissenter often becomes more composed as pressure increases, because pressure strips away illusion and forces reality into view. While others panic emotionally, he begins seeing structure clearly for the first time. This is where wealth transfer truly occurs, not merely financial wealth, psychological wealth, relational wealth, strategic wealth. The calm observer accumulates leverage, while emotional participants exhaust themselves fighting battles that never mattered. Yet the final layer of selective defiance remains hidden from most people, because it appears contradictory on the surface. The elite dissenter does not reject conventional systems because he hates society. He rejects blind conformity because conformity weakens perception, and weakened perception eventually weakens judgment. Once judgment weakens, dependence begins. Dependence on approval, dependence on trends, dependence on emotional consensus. From that moment forward, The individual no longer leads his environment.